My guest today is an author, a mentor. She runs retreats worldwide. Her books, the Rainbow Tablet series, have garnered her international recognition as an expert on divine co creation, multidimensional mastery, and sacred embodiment. She's also a podcaster. I am so pleased to introduce you all to Sia-Lanu Estrella.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
If you could, please tell us a little bit about the journey to where you are today.
Well, it's certainly not conventional what I'm doing. I did actually start in a very conventional background in a corporate and advertising and then senior communications role. Now I seem to be completely at the other end of the world for that, literally and figuratively. So I am Australian, but I currently live in the UK and I also spent 3 years living in the Peruvian Andes in Cusco. I am an international author. I write books called The Rainbow Tablets. So the first one is The Rainbow Tablets Journey Back to Wholeness. And the second one is The Rainbow Tablets Divine Union and Sacred Sexuality. So these are really deep self empowerment books. I am a sacred embodiment mentor. So I have incredible deep embodiment programs. I run a mentorship program and I run retreats in Egypt, in Peru, and probably in Mexico soon. So pretty different space to the corporate desk that I used to be at.
Tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a sacred embodiment guide. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah. So for me, the big thing that I see a lot of people struggle with is they get caught between two worlds. They have this incredibly 3D experience. Many of them might be in a corporate role or a mainstream role, or even just any role that's your 9 to 5, or like I was, it's a lot longer than that. It was 70 hours a week. So you've got this role that takes a lot of your time and for a lot of people, it's not necessarily what is the full expression of their heart or even remotely the expression of their heart. It's a thing that they're doing to pay the bills. And then around that, there's all of the kind of logistical things. So if people have families, there's the school pickups, there's bath time, there's homework, there's the very functional aspect of life. So that's over here in the 3D world. And then there's this kind of magical side that feels like a whole other world. It's the thing that lights us up, that makes us feel that spark that so many of us felt when we were kids. It's the thing that for some people it's very, very present. For other people, it's just a glimpse of knowing that there's something so much more sacred and magical about life, that it's not meant to be the hamster wheel. It's not meant to be this very prescribed thing of go to school, get the right grades, get into the right university, get the job, get the promotion, buy the house, buy the second house, the investment property, finally retire and finally start living your life. So what we've been sold is this, it's kind of this machine where we're constantly chasing something. We're constantly chasing something external and we end up very disconnected from ourselves. But this other world that is like begging to be remembered, it comes from a place of deep connection. It comes from a place of the heart, of the magic of connection with the earth as consciousness, of a connection with the trees, the mountains, the animals, and the stars. And a lot of people maybe try to ignore that because they don't have space for it or they don't understand it. Whereas other people get caught with one foot either side and they don't know how to bring it together. So they might be living in this very hamster wheel way and then they'll go on a retreat. And then maybe 2 or 3 months later, they will go to a shamanic healing or a sound healing or whatever it might be. And it's like these intermittent heartbeats, these intermittent moments of truth. So for me, sacred embodiment is about bringing it together. It was never meant to be separate, and we were never meant to be just experiencing that magic as a glimpse, as a way of like sustaining ourselves so that we could then go back into the rat race and run ourselves into the ground. It's about how we approach every day, how we actually live life as sacred And even if we're in a corporate environment or a mainstream environment, or maybe we're an entrepreneur, how we can approach everything from a place of mastery, of knowing ourselves both as this spiritual or cosmic being and this physical being. And for me, the sacred embodiment is about unifying earth and stars within ourselves and really creating our reality in a really tangible, magical, masterful way.
I love that. As a society, we really push people to look outside of themselves for answers. Get another degree, read another book, take another course. And once you start going down this path of personal development, you recognize fairly quickly that everything you need is actually right inside of you. So while the information gathering can be helpful in the discernment process, it's really about bringing forth the answers from yourself. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, one of the lines in my first book is that the journey back to wholeness is a process of shedding all that we are not in order to re embody all that we truly are. So, if we think about it in the sense of what happens when we come into the world, from the moment we are born, we are being conditioned. We're being conditioned by our family, by their beliefs, by their view of what is a realistic life, what is the path that we should be taking. We are conditioned by society, by culture, for some people by religion. And then along the way, we develop a lot of limiting beliefs. So again, these can come from these external voices. It can come from our parents. If our parents have limiting beliefs around money or abundance, or you need to play it safe, or it's not realistic to dream that big, then that gets ingrained into us. Some of the limiting beliefs come from our own experiences. Maybe we try something and we fail in inverted commas, but we don't have the perhaps support to understand that nothing's really failing. Everything's just experience, and we're learning and we're evolving. So we then shut down and we make ourselves small and we feel, I don't want to try again. It can be as simple as going into, when we're kids, going into a talent contest and freezing up. And those things, if we are not supported to process them, can really remain as quite strong traumas. And then for some people, there's additional traumas that they go through. Maybe there's abuse, or maybe there's relationships that are not healthy. So we end up with all of this noise, all of this noise, this conditioning, these limiting beliefs, and it just completely keeps us away from the truth of who we are. So to come back into the heart and to really start to awaken, who am I? How many people get to their maybe 20s, mid 20s and think, I don't even know who I am, because they've spent their whole life trying to meet this external validation, trying to please the parents, trying to do what society tells them is expected of them, and making the choices that are the smart choices and whatever it might be. And then they suddenly feel so hollow inside. They might be ticking all the boxes. And this is what happened to me. I was very in tune as a young person and as a teenager, but bless them, my parents wanted me to have what they called a normal career. And so I ended up with the senior role in advertising agencies and later in on the corporate side. And I had the Waterview apartment and I was on a really big salary and I felt empty inside. I felt literally like I was dying inside. And actually, my health started to really, really crumble. And this is the problem that most people face, is that they don't know how to, once you get to that point, it's like, how do you find, what do I actually want to do? What is my intuition? I don't know. I've had all these other voices in my field telling me what to do all my life. What do I really want to do? And so it becomes this process of pulling it apart, coming into self awareness of the patterns that are playing out for us, and literally deconstructing them and finding the way back to the truth of who we are and giving ourselves permission. That's a huge thing, giving ourselves permission, because most of us have grown up not having that permission. Anytime that we've tried to assert this is what I want to do, or this is the life that I want to live, or this is what feels right for me, we've been met with all the reasons why that can't be. And our decisions have been channeled or funneled into what other people think is right for us. And it's about that external validation. So, yes, what we tend to see when people start to try to find, I guess, this piece that's missing within themselves is that because they're so programmed to look externally, they will tend to maybe look for the guru, look for the people who are positioning themselves as, I can heal you, I can give you the answers. And this is such a toxic thing because it's prolonging the disempowerment. It's feeding into this disempowerment of we need something outside of ourselves or we need someone outside of ourselves. So the work that I do, as you've shared, is it's all about helping people to deconstruct the things and change the behaviors and change the patterns that are keeping them away from their own truth and to find the answers within themselves. So I never give people the answers. That's not my role because I don't know your answers. Nobody knows your answers but you. And you've probably been told those answers by other people your whole life. What I'm here to do is help people to see, no, you are sovereign. You are empowered. You are your own strongest guide. And I help them have the tools to tap into that and awaken that and give themselves that permission.
Tell me about the journey. Obviously, you were in Australia, you were living the life that was expected, doing all the things, ticking all the boxes, as you say. And yet you knew you had this calling that there was something more that you were not experiencing. How do you actually go from that life to channeling all of this sacred embodiment knowledge? What's the
Yeah.
journey?
I would say for me, it was a series of baby steps. So I grew up with an abusive mum. So I had a very strong programming to people please, to really look for that external validation. So I really was the straight A student. I was a workaholic, an absolute workaholic, because I was constantly wanting to make others happy and show my worth because I didn't have that self worth within that had been eroded. So it was a really long journey for me because at some point I was just so unhappy. I was living a life that didn't feel like my life. It wasn't the life that I wanted. It was the life that had been kind of forced upon me. And my health was really failing. And I had to find that courage to stand up to my parents and start making my own choices. And it happened gradually. And it was really scary because I really looked up to my parents. And my dad was so beautiful, so, so beautiful. And I cared so much about not disappointing him. So there was this one really defining moment for me. I was very senior in advertising agencies. I had moved up very quickly because they absolutely love workaholics in that space. And I had just been offered promotion to group account director, which is as high as you can go without being the general manager. And I think I was 27 at the time, so quite young. And I remember going home that day, and the second I walked out of the door, I threw up in the gutter. It just felt like I was facing prison. And I thought, this is not how a big promotion should feel. You know, there are so many people that would trip over themselves to get this role. And I had this rising panic that was so severe that it made me throw up in the gutter. And I thought, this has to change. It has to change. I can't keep living this life. And I went in the next morning and I turned down the promotion. And I knew that was the end of my career at that agency because you cannot do that. So I had to hand in my notice and I really wanted to get a job in a children's charity. I wanted to start doing something meaningful. So I thought I can go and get a marketing role in a children's charity. I did not realize how difficult that was going to be because no one in charity wanted someone with the corporate mindset. And I was overqualified and all of this. Anyway, a miracle kind of happened that after a lot of rejection, my boss, bless his heart, came to me, said, "Are you really, really going to see out this resignation or are you going to change your mind and stay?" I said to him, "No, I need to make this change." He said, all right, well, I wasn't going to tell you this unless I knew you were really, really going. He said, but there's a role at a children's charity and I can get you in. And it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful of him. And I made that transition. And I remember telling my dad, because it was a $30,000 pay cut, which was quite significant when you're 27 years old. And my dad was horrified. He just said to me, sweetheart, you've got your whole life to do this fluffy stuff. You should be getting your second investment. You should be upgrading your car, all of this sort of thing. And I just said to him, Dad, I'm not happy. And I think that was when he saw me say it with tears in my eyes, I think most parents, not all parents, but most parents, they just want their kids to be happy. And so when they're trying to force these things on their kids, it's because they want you to be happy and they want you to be successful. And I think in that moment, my dad saw it and he said to me, all right, sweetheart, if this is what you need to do, then I'll support your decision. And so that was the first really big shift for me. And then it was a series. It was a series of shifts. I moved through different jobs. And at a certain point, I decided to cut down to 3 days and start doing more of my healing work. And then eventually the really massive shift. And in the background, I was doing the work on myself. So I had a mentor, again, not someone to give me the answers, but someone to hold space for me to work through things and to have the tools that I needed. I was doing courses that were of that kind of nature. Now I offer all of these things and I offer things at a level that wasn't available to me. But at that time, I was tapping into what was available. So I was doing all of that work. And then I cut down to 3 days a week. And I had been going back and forth to Peru for years. And every time I went to Cusco, I just felt, I want to live here. I'm meant to live here. It was a knowing within my soul. It was just this, I knew it from the time I was 14 and I read a book that was set in Peru and I could not have even pointed out Peru on a map at that time, but I said, I am going to live in Peru. I just knew it.
And
And
you're square on the other side of the world saying, I'm
right,
going to move from Australia to Peru. That's not a normal transition. You didn't have
different
any ties to Peru.
different
And
language,
yeah.
everything. It was just this soul calling. And I never did it because I had too much fear, but also because my mum was very good at the emotional blackmail to keep me home and everything. But I think mostly it was because I wasn't ready to step out and do something so big and so scary. And then, this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but hey, it's the truth of what happened. When you come on this path, of reconnecting with yourself and reconnecting with the earth, you start to understand that everything has consciousness. And so, first, I learned it from the Aboriginal elders in Australia. But then, when I was going to Peru, I was starting to learn through some of the Andean wisdom keepers. And on one of my trips, I went out to the most sacred mountain in Cusco. And I have never felt such an affinity with any place in my life. And I knew that this mountain was one of my biggest guides. And in Peru, they call them apus, mountain spirits. So they have personalities and they communicate with them as the guides and guardians that they are. So this one's called Al Sangate. And I had gone back to Australia. And after a few months, Al Sangate was reaching out to me and he was saying, you need to bring a retreat. You need to bring a group. And I'm like, why are you talking to me about this? I don't do this. And I had wanted to do it, but I had no belief in myself that I could do it. And then suddenly there's mountains telling me I'm meant to run a retreat. I mean, it was just crazy. I'm just a little old me. And there were the limiting beliefs, of course. So the mountain kept on for, oh my gosh, probably about 3 months. And finally I said, okay, all right, you got it. I'm going to say yes to this, but you have to make it so easy for me because I have no idea what I'm doing. And it turned out to be the most effortless thing. The people were brought towards me. I already had the tour guide contact, and it wasn't just any tour guide. It was someone who was deeply embodied in Peruvian traditions of the Inca lineage. And it was incredible. And so, as fate, or not fate, as destiny would have it, I I hadn't planned it, but it ended up being that the itinerary fell in a way that my birthday was at the mountain. So I said to the mountain, all right, here we are. You've summoned us. What's the wisdom you have for me? And the mountain said, you need to move to Peru. And I said, I can't. Those times have passed. I wanted to do that for years, but now I have this great job. I have a new car. I have a dog. I had all these, all the reasons not to go. And for 3 days that we were out there, the mountain just kept saying the same thing to me. The mountain's quite known as being quite strong in its guidance. So you can't argue with it. But I was also very headstrong. I was quite stubborn. And I remember on the third day saying to the mountain, look, Ausangate, I say this with so much respect. Usually you're bang on with your guidance, but can we just agree to disagree at this point? Don't think you're on the mark this time. Can you give me some other guidance? And oh my gosh, honestly, the cheek, because this is the most sacred mountain in that area. And I swear the mountain waggled his finger at me, I felt it. I felt it. And he said, that is the wisdom. And in that moment, I just said yes. I just said yes. And I went back to Australia. And within 3 months, I quit my job straight away. I gave them 3 months' notice. I sold my house. I sold my car. I found the perfect family for my dog, someone I'd known for 8 years with a dog of the same breed. And all of a sudden, I was arriving in Peru with 2 bags and no plan, just an open heart and full trust that for the first time in my life, I was going all in and I was going to really follow what my heart was calling.
Is this what you would say was the beginning of your consciousness around the importance of just being and not so much doing? I mean, obviously, there were actions that you specifically had to take, steps you took in order to go back to Peru. But is this where perhaps you started to get a real sense that most of this was about the showing up and allowing things to unfold rather than the strategizing and deciding and the doing?
Yeah, it was definitely the start of it. I had this realization leading up to this that I just realized that my worst regret would be to get to the end of my life and look back and think, I never did it. I never actually did what I wanted to do. I never lived my life. And I made a decision to go all in and to follow the guidance. So that was the first part of it is, again, I say it's about giving yourself permission, right? But the second part of it was about coming into deep trust and just allowing rather than having a plan, just going, okay, I am feeling this in my body and in my cells and in my energy field that I'm just going to see where it takes me. But the other thing that happened once I got to Peru was I had to go through a massive shedding because I was very much in. So, my second book, The Rainbow Tablets, Divine Union and Sacred Sexuality, it talks about breaking these old patterns and distortions of the toxic masculine and the wounded feminine so that we can come into the sacred co-creation through the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and we can come into that highest ability to manifest and work with these energies within ourselves. And at that time, I was still very much in the toxic masculine. Because of my upbringing and because of the trauma, I had gone into this distorted masculine of trying to control everything because that gave me a sense of safety. I now know that's a fake sense of safety, but at the time, it was how I made myself feel safe. So I was very shut off. My heart had massive blocks around it. People used to refer to me as the ice queen. And anyone who knows me now would just think that can't possibly be true because you're just such a warm, open person. But these were the barriers of my trauma that I had built up. So when I got to Peru, I came in a very masculine and a very Western energy. I was like, all right, great. Yep. Okay. Pachamama, Alsangate, what are we doing here? What's the plan? Okay. What's the next step? And no one spoke to me. I didn't hear from my spirit team. I didn't hear from the mountain. And this went on for days. And at the time, I had a shamanic mentor who was Peruvian, but living in Australia, funnily enough. And I said to her, I don't know what's happening. Have I made a huge mistake? And she said, no, you are being taught how to be. And they have a Quechua word for it. And I have forgotten the Quechua word, but she said, you are in a different place now. You have stepped into a different way of being. And this Western mindset, you will not be able to access what you need to access if you're coming from that do energy. And I remember her saying to me, go up to the, because she knew how I was. I was so do. And she said to me, go up to the Temple of the Moon and just be. And then she said, and when I say just be, I don't mean journal, I don't mean meditate, I don't mean sit there and strategize. She said, I mean just be. And it was so uncomfortable. It was really scary because it felt like I was losing control. And this is where I had to break down those false constructs of control. And the funniest thing was, as I started to connect in with this, yes, it actually started to allow some of my divine feminine energy to rise, which is where we get the much stronger intuition, where we get that divine guidance, that divine inspiration. But actually happened was I remembered that as a child, I loved to be. I remember I used to lie out on the grass, and my favorite thing was just to stare at the sky and watch the clouds, even if there weren't clouds and it was just the blue. I could just feel the connection to all that was, and I would be experiencing the wind through the trees, and I would just be in this total state of being. And my mum would come out and yell at me, and she would call me bone idle. And if you're so bone idle that you can just lie out here doing nothing, then I need to find some chores for you to do. So I was really trained that it was never okay to just be.
So you're in Peru waiting for a calling, inspiration, intuition to kick in. What happens? How does it all start to come together? Because everything you're saying makes intuitive sense, but need to let go in order for what needs to happen next to unfold. And I can feel the discomfort in my own body as I think about the need to let go of that control in order to do that. But you're starting to shed that Western skin, if you will. What happens? How do you know you're on the right path? How do you start to feel like, okay, this is exactly where I need to be?
Yeah, so I made a commitment to just lean into it. So I should preface it by saying that I did sell my apartment. So I had money behind me. I had enough money to last for 4 years. So I had that safety net of, okay, something's got to emerge within the space of 4 years. Something's got to come through. And at first, I was really anxious. I wanted the answers straight away. But as I committed, and this is where it really helped to have a mentor, I am a big believer in investing in ourselves and holding sacred containers for ourselves. Because to be honest, if I had been trying to work through this myself, I think I would have got lost in it. And it wasn't that someone else was telling me the answers, they were just helping me to understand what I maybe couldn't see and giving me the tools to start to move through it so I could tap into what was trying to emerge. So that really, really helped me. And I was able to lean into, you've stepped into a different world now. You've said yes to something that has been calling you from the time that I could have my earliest memories. This has been with you all your life and you're stepping into it, but it's different to anything that you've known as an adult. So I leaned into this process of shedding, this process of initiation. It was huge. It went for about a year to a year and a half. I call it my year of University of Life. And, Peru, it's very shamanic land. So it can be a very shamanic process to, you have a lot of physical purging that comes up as you're releasing these frequencies that are stored in your body. You're faced with initiations. You are brought to your knees. You are cracked open. And I think I had committed to this path so much that I just said, whatever is asked of me, I'm going to lean into it because there was no going back. I had nothing to go back to. It was all in. And I think once you make a decision like that, you just have to come into the sacredness of it. And I felt such a deep, even though it took a while to get the answers, I would say it took 3 months before I really started getting some clarity. But I felt a knowing within myself that this is uncomfortable. This is really confronting. This is cracking me open, but this is where I need to be. And I'm all in. So, yeah, I started doing that. And then I actually got called to travel a lot in that first year. I had to go to Egypt for the first time, and that was really powerful for me. It awakened a lot of the next level of my multidimensional gifts. I was guided to go back to Australia, to go out to Uluru and Katajuta, which are very sacred lands in Australia. I was guided to go to Mexico, to England, to Spain. And again, it was huge trust because I had no income coming in and I had this finite amount in my bank and I'm having to just, okay, so everything's costing and okay, just keep trusting. But as I did this and I trusted the process and I allowed, which is the feminine energy, and I took the aligned action, which is the divine masculine energy. So the distorted masculine energy is the control when we're trying to steer everything. But when we bring it into aligned action, which is working in this beautiful sacred weaving with the allowing and the feminine energy, this is when magic starts to happen. And I went deeper into the ceremony. I came deeper into what I call sacred co-creation. My third book is called The Rainbow Tablets, Abundance and Sacred Co-creation. I'm writing it at the moment, but it really is about living in this way of mastery and weaving with the earth and weaving with the stars. And it brought me to the path of where I am today. And it just got to that point where things became very clear and it was, okay, this step. So I think the first step was about a year or a year and a half in, I was guided to start sharing 6-month mentorships. And then maybe it was a year and a half or 2 years in that I started writing my first book. And it just kept, the pieces of the puzzle kept laying down. And it was such a different approach to my advertising days where you would have a business plan and objectives and a forecast and all of this. It was everything. There is nothing since I started this path, and it's been 5 years now, maybe 5.5. There has been nothing that I have sat down and gone, right, what can I offer? What can I turn into an offering? How can I create revenue? There's never been a moment like that. It's always been through ceremony and connection within myself of what is being asked of me, what is my highest service, what is flowing through me. It's a very different approach.
How do you help people to better understand the difference between when their ego is at play in making a change that they might want to have in their life and when they are really being guided by intuition?
Yeah, I would say definitely I would say to them, I recommend reading my books because the first book does go into ego death. And ego death is not the death of ego, it's the death of ego's control over us. So that we can start to see when ego kicks in and we can start to make a different choice. And I think that's a big thing. Some people think it's about eradicating the ego. No, it's not. It's about learning to work with the ego and to be able to make a choice that is actually for your highest alignment, even when the ego kicks in and tries to steer you in a different direction. And then the second book is really coming into that power of the divine feminine and the divine masculine, which regardless of our gender, we all hold, and weaving with those energies. So as a very top line answer, I would say if your decision or choice that you're making is coming from a headspace and you're weighing up pros and cons and you're taking into consideration everybody's opinions and what's the right thing to do and you're trying to forecast and everything, I would say that's ego. If it comes from a feeling of, I just know, and this just feels right, then it's coming from the heart. And that's intuition. And I would say that's the greatest difference. And I know some people they struggle with that because they get that feeling, but then the mind starts to kick in. And so this is where I would say our personal practice becomes paramount because most people don't have a personal practice. They just get up, they start their morning routine, they go throughout their day, they come home, they go to bed, they do the same thing the next day. And they are not aware of what their center is. What does my energy feel like? So they're just constantly surrounded by external energy and they can't tell the difference. So this is why they don't know what intuition feels like. What does my voice sound like as opposed to the mind or the ego? So I would say the biggest thing is to start with committing to a morning practice. And I am of the belief that no one can honestly say they don't have time for a morning practice. Even if you've got kids, even if you've got whatever. Everyone has 15 minutes, even if it means just setting that alarm 15 minutes earlier to change the entire trajectory of your day, but not just your day, it changes the trajectory of your life because you are suddenly taking that time in the morning to align with your frequency. So I have a practice that I use that I share on my YouTube, and it's a rainbow pyramid. And basically, it's a beautiful, sacred, energetic space where we connect into the earth, we connect in with the stars, we come into union with it. We set up a beautiful rainbow pyramid. So it's about holding your own energetic space. And then we cleanse that space within it, which brings you back to your frequency. And it's really about just creating that sovereign space of, hey, okay, this is me. This is me. This is not me with all of the stress of work, me with the niggling of the partner or the kids playing up. This is just me. And when we have that center point and that reference point, we know when we're out of alignment. We know when we're like agitated or we're not in our normal space. The mind is saying things, and we can just literally at any time stop for 5 or 10 minutes, reconnect in with that and clear the energy, come back into the heart. Okay, so what is the decision that I need to make here? And boom, it's what you feel as opposed to what you think. So I would say that having a, an energetic practice and having a spiritual practice, and I do feel for most people, especially when they're early on the journey, having some sort of sacred container. I mean, I on a multidimensional mastery and sacred embodiment program, which is, I feel like that's paramount. It really is about everything we've spoken about. It's about all of the shedding and having those practices to come into that empowerment within yourself. But whatever it might be, having some sort of container that helps them to create that space for themselves and to get to know, what do I feel like? That's where you start to really cultivate intuition, because you start to move all of those outside influences out of your field. And that's where the clarity comes.
Talk about how much your life has changed, because you are probably one of the most intuitive people I've ever met, and you feel it. It's palpable, even through a Zoom call. But I don't know that people can appreciate how much of what you're saying you really are channeling. It's coming through you. It is not something that we would have talk about when we say rack your brain to come up with the answer, but really that you are in receipt of this knowledge.
Yeah, so this is actually what I teach. This is when I talk about sacred embodiment and sacred co creation and multidimensional mastery. I teach people how to live their highest expression and how to be in their highest service by becoming that vessel we bring through. Because I'm of the belief that we are here at a time that is, oh my God, so incredible. We are bringing the huge awakening here, but I don't believe that it happens by doing things the same way. We are bringing, we might say new cosmic remembering. Some people might say ancient and lost cosmic remembering. It's probably a combination of both, but we are bringing it down to earth. So I've got clients who are in medicine or in science, and they are like really learning this way of becoming a channel, becoming a vessel to bring huge breakthroughs. I've got people working in finance. I've got people working in marketing. I've got people working as healers. We all have this capacity, every single one of us. It's not about you were born with gifts or you weren't. Absolutely not. We are all incredible multidimensional masters. It's just that most of us haven't reactivated it in ourselves yet. So when you ask how my life is different, it's chalk and cheese. I can't even describe the life that I was living when I had chronic illness. I felt like I was dying inside. I was on an absolute treadmill, living up to everybody else's expectations, but not honoring myself. I look back at that and I know I lived it. I don't even recognize that person. I just don't. And now I am so true to myself. I live in such authentic expression. I live in such embodied integrity. And the most, I guess, palpable way that that living life in this way comes through is I create regular miracles, and I share this with my audiences. Some of it is you'll read about it in the books, but as an example, and again, I might get teary as I share this, but I'm getting better at talking about these things without tearing up. But during the pandemic, I had to get across the world twice through closed borders. So I won't spend detail into going into the first one of how I got from Peru to the UK, but I want to talk about how I got back to Australia to see my dad one last time. And the thing that had happened was in January 2020, so this is just a couple of months before the lockdowns, my team had been really pushing me and saying the first Rainbow Tablets book must be released at the beginning of January 2020. And I was like, gosh, what's the big hurry? I mean, a few months, what difference does it make? And now obviously we know why books like this were needed at that time. But at that time, I didn't know. And I was back in Australia for 5 weeks, rushing around trying to see everyone. And, it's a big thing. And then I'm needing to fly out to Uluru and Katajuda, which is the most sacred land area in Australia in the Red Desert. And I thought, I don't have the energy, but the calling was so strong. And I knew by this point in my journey, you cannot ignore these things. So I went out there and I communicated with the Aboriginal ancestors. So when I say that, I mean in etheric form, but for me, they're just as real as you and I. And they released some of the rainbow codes so that the book could really land. And on my last day there, I was channeling and then I thanked them and I closed my journal and I went to stand up and they said, there's one more thing we need to tell you. And they said, this will be the last time that you see one of your parents.
Mm.
And, whew, and I said, thank you, but I choose a different timeline. And so I went back to Sydney. I had 4 more days in the country. I was meant to be catching up with so many people and I cancelled everything. I stayed and I played cards with my parents and I went out to lunches and I just spent the time with them. And then the pandemic hit and border closures. Peru went into military lockdown and I had an urgent need to get to a developed country to have a procedure. So I managed to make that happen. So by that time I was in England. And then in November in 2020, my dad went in for a routine colonoscopy. And unfortunately, he came home that night. He had excruciating pain. They rushed him back and had to put him straight into surgery because it turned out the surgeon had perforated his bowel and my dad was fighting for his life. And it was a fight that lasted 10 months. But at that point, it was really touch and go. And so he went through a series of operations and I tried to get a flight back. I don't know if you remember, but Australia just shut up shop. They didn't
Completely.
care that people needed to get home. I think there was something like 40. Yeah, there was like 40,000 people, Australians trying to get back to Australia and no one could get back. So I booked a commercial flight, let him know I had the ticket. The ticket got cancelled. I book a second flight, ticket gets cancelled. Book a third flight. And my dad was really holding on at that point, holding on to see me. It still chokes me up. Whew. And it got cancelled. And I thought, how am I going to tell him this? It's going to kill him. And so I told him and I said, Dad, you know who I am. You know what I can do. I am getting back to see you. Just keep holding on. Let me weave my magic. And that day I was standing in my London apartment and I thought, okay, the only ones that can help me now are the Aboriginal ancestors because they are the ones that told me it would be my last time to see one of my parents. And I told them I wanted another timeline. So I connected in multidimensionally from London to Uluru. And I said to the Aboriginal ancestors, please open the pathway for me. I need a miracle here. And if there's anything I can do to be of service, just let me know. So there were some codes that they needed me to embody and to bring down into the earth. And it took me 8 to 10 hours. It was pretty intense. I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I had an email from the Australian government saying I had a flight. And I had
Oh
been
my
on that
gosh.
list. I had been on that list for 7.5 months, and I had never, ever had a single email from the government. So I got to see my dad. I got to hold my dad one last time. And when you ask me, how has my life changed? How is it palpable? This is what's possible. I don't just believe and I don't just say, but I live this way of creating our reality, of working in this deep sacred co-creation and of creating miracles, because nothing is set. I know people would normally look at that and go, okay, borders are closed, flights are getting canceled, there's no way to get there. You just have to give up. You just have to accept that this is the reality. But we create our reality.
Incredible. Sia, really want to continue talking. And so I'm going to ask that you come back because there's so much more to dig in here. But I'm going to have you come back after I've read the Rainbow Tablets Journey Back to Wholeness, which is Sia's first book available on Amazon, as well as the Rainbow Tablets Divine Union and Sacred Sexuality.
Yeah.
Both are available on Amazon. Sia is currently working on her third book. When should we expect that to be out? Later this year?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely going to get that out this year. So that's really exciting. That one's about abundance and sacred co creation. These books are life changing. What a lot of people tell me is they can feel it's a transmission and they can feel that it is bringing this remembering within themselves. So these books are not just something you read, it's an experience.
Lest anyone think that leaving behind the Western corporate world to walk on this path, which I know is not only given you new life, the vitality and the vibrance that comes through is just incredible, but has also led to abundance.
Mhm.
Just confirm for us, because I already know this. I feel it, I know it. Abundance is available to all of us, and that
100%.
tapping into this is probably been threefold, fourfold, fivefold, tenfold of what you had experienced in the quote unquote normal societal going up the ladder. Am I not?
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, I was on a really good wage in Australia, a really good six-figure wage, and I am earning more now in living my truth. I do it through integrity. There are a lot of people out there doing it in, I would say, non-embodied ways. And yep, there's a lot of abundance that can be made in that way. There's a lot of abundance that can be made by positioning yourself as a guru and giving people the answers. But what I want to say to people is, taking those paths and living out of integrity and just trying to cash in on disempowering people in whatever form, whatever profession. This is the old way, and these are the old programs that are being broken down, and it's not in alignment with our souls. So eventually those people hit the lessons that they're going to need to bring them back to truth. There's a saying, if you don't listen, if you need to know something, the universe will send you a feather. If you ignore the feather, the universe will send you a brick. If you ignore the brick, the universe will send you a bus. And the idea is, don't wait for the bus. So what I would say to people is, just know that when you stand in that integrity, I'm going to be honest, it can at times be a bit of a harder path, because people are used to things in a different way. And when you're bringing something new, it's sometimes a little bit slower, but the abundance will always be there. The rewards will be tenfold, even just like health. I had chronic illness for over 20 years of my life. I have now had 5 years of the most amazing health. You can hear it in my voice. So absolutely financial abundance. And this is what I'm talking about in my third book, is that the lack program that has been seeded into our society, which is the foundation for all greed, corruption, control, disempowerment from that place of feeling like it can be pulled out from underneath us all the time. This lack program is there to keep us disempowered. And when we remember that we are the expression of whatever word you want to use, the expression of the divine essence, the expression of divine love, the expression of the all, the source, the universe, whatever word, it doesn't matter. But when we remember that we are part of this sacred co creation and we are tapped into the infinite, ever flowing abundance of sacred co creation. And this is again where the divine feminine and divine masculine come in, because the divine masculine is giving, the divine feminine is receiving. And I always start drawing a figure of eight when I start talking about these things, because it is that infinite, ever flowing, limitless abundance. When we come back to that truth within ourselves, not only do we become a magnet for aligned abundance, but we become an amplifier of abundance for all who flow abundance towards us. And this to me is the fundamental of sacred co creation.
That seems like the best place to end our current conversation, as much as I would love for it to keep going. How can people find you, Sia? What's the best
Yeah.
way?
Yeah. So I've actually just started a podcast as well, which is called Live Your Highest Expression. And I also have a website, Sia-Lanu Estrella.com. I am on the social media platforms, but I would say the main ways that I'm sharing now are through my newsletter and through my website, through my podcast. And then, of course, I just would absolutely recommend that people read the books, because they are so life changing. And when you said before, when you were saying about that these are channeled, I just something comical, when I write them, I do it in a flow, and then I finish what comes through, and then I go back and read it, and I'm like, "Wow, no way. Oh my gosh, that's amazing." Because it's like I'm reading it for the first time. So, when I say these books are amazing, I'm not saying it necessarily as the author, I'm saying it as someone who has experienced the information in these books.
And I don't doubt for a minute, like, this is I know you sit at the computer and you gotta do the work of showing up and being available for it to flow through you, but the energy around you is palpable. So I really encourage everyone, go to Sia-Lanu Estrella.com, and I believe you have a retreat in Peru coming up later in the year.
I do. At the time that we're recording this, there's only 2 spots left in that one, but if there were enough people, I could do a second retreat while I'm over there. So I would just say to people, if they're feeling the call to go and experience Peru, get in touch. And yeah, I'm always going to be working with those lands because it is my second home.
I love this. Sia, thank you so much for your time today, for just giving of yourself and really bringing all of this wonderful energy to this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please comment, like, and subscribe to this channel to continue to receive content that inspires. Let us know what resonates and what you'd like to hear more about. You are here for a purpose. It's time for you to step into that purpose, become the most authentic version of you, and start living, truly living your extraordinary life. It's never too late. And in fact, we're just getting started.